Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
You're probably sitting there right now. Maybe you're stuck in traffic on your commute, or maybe you're just waiting for your morning coffee to brew. Or perhaps you're out for a walk trying to clear your head before the day spoons. And no matter what you're doing, you are completely bombarded every single day with advice on how to live better.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Like how to live longer, how to optimize your body, how to fix your brain. It is an absolute avalanche of information out there. And honestly,
Yeah.
a lot of it just flat out contradicts itself.
It's exhausting.
It is. It's exhausting to try and keep up. But today, we are doing something entirely different. Today, we have gathered a towering stack of source material. We're talking about clinical studies, personal biohacking experiments, data from tens of thousands of users.
Some really incredible sample sizes in this stack.
Huge. And insights from some of the sharpest minds in medicine, psychology, and biomechanics. We aren't just looking at a disjointed list of health tips today. What we have here is a paradigm shift in how we understand the human machine.
It truly is a shift in perspective. I mean, for decades, the medical and wellness communities have treated the body and the mind as these distinctly separate, almost unrelated entities.
Like they're completely different systems.
Exactly. We had the fitness bucket over here, the diet bucket over there, and the mental health bucket just hidden away in the corner. But the underlying theme of all the research we are unpacking today is synthesis. True longevity, living a life that is actually robust and vibrant, not just extending your lifespan for the sake of it, requires a holistic alignment.
Yeah.
We're looking at how your nutrition directly alters your biomechanics, how your mindset physically rewires your nervous system, and really how the modern world constantly, relentlessly tries to interfere with those ancient, brilliant biological pathways.
And the mission for this deep dive is straightforward. We are going to extract the absolute best, most actionable nuggets from all these experts, these studies, and these personal experiments, so that you, the listener, can bypass the information overload entirely. We want you to walk away from this conversation with a tangible toolkit for true longevity.
That's the goal.
And to help me do that, I have the ultimate synthesizer of complex data sitting right across from me. You always manage to take these dense, highly technical clinical outcomes and explain not just what the numbers are, but why they actually matter to our daily routine.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm genuinely looking forward to this one because this particular stack of sources challenges so many of our deeply held cultural assumptions.
It really does.
It forces us to rethink everything from the basic fuel we put in our bodies before a morning workout to how our daily stress levels might literally be rewriting our genetic code. We have a lot of modern dogma to challenge today.
I am so ready for this. Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with one of the most stubborn dogmas in the entire fitness world, which is fasted training.
Oh, this is a big one.
I have to admit, I spent years buying into this. I would wake up at 5 in the morning, chug a glass of bitter black coffee, and go suffer on a treadmill feeling dizzy and weak because I thought those were the rules.
Right, because the logic was always pitched to us that if you don't have food in your digestive system, your body has no choice but to burn stored fat.
Exactly. But looking at the clinical data in our sources, that entire concept is falling apart.
It's falling apart because the physiology just doesn't support the cultural narrative. Let's examine the work of exercise physiologist Dr. Katie Hirsch. She conducted a rigorous 8-week clinical study specifically analyzing overweight adults who were assigned to do high-intensity interval training, or HIT, on stationary bicycles.
And this wasn't just a survey, right?
No, not at all. This was a highly controlled 8-week clinical intervention, and her findings directly challenged the fasted cardio obsession. She divided the participants. One group trained completely fasted, as the dogma suggests, and the other group consumed just 7 to 10 grams of essential amino acids about 30 minutes prior to jumping on the bikes.
Which, just to contextualize that for you listening, is a microscopic amount of food. 7 to 10 grams of amino acids is barely a handful of calories. It is not a plate of eggs and toast.
Right, it's an incredibly small metabolic intervention. But the physiological results of that tiny intervention were staggering. The group that consumed those essential amino acids experienced vastly superior muscle remodeling compared to the fasted group.
Right.
And perhaps more surprisingly to the fasted cardio advocates, they showed increased post-workout fat oxidation.
So they burn more fat by eating beforehand.
Exactly. The old logic of starving yourself to burn fat completely fails here. By giving the body just a tiny bit of the foundational building blocks of protein before the exertion, you actually signal to the body that it's safe. You signal that it has the resources to build muscle and oxidize fat.
What fascinates me most about her findings is the psychological component. The group that took the amino acids reported a significantly lower rate of perceived exertion.
They felt better doing it.
The workout literally felt easier to them, even though they were doing the exact same high-intensity intervals. If we bring this back to your daily routine, it poses a major question. Why on earth would you choose to suffer through a miserable fasted workout, feeling faint and exhausted, when consuming a tiny bit of protein yields superior physiological results and makes the whole experience feel far less punishing?
That is the crucial takeaway. Fasted training, especially high-intensity training, often puts the body into an acute stress state. From an evolutionary perspective, your body thinks, we are starving and we are sprinting to escape a predator.
So it panics.
It panics, it spikes cortisol. To get immediate energy, it can actually break down your hard-earned muscle tissue to convert it into glucose. But by providing those essential amino acids beforehand, you bypass that internal panic response. You give your muscles the precise fuel they need to repair themselves, which ultimately leads to a higher resting metabolic rate because you are preserving muscle mass.
It's about working in tandem with your physiology.
Yes, rather than constantly fighting against it in a forced state of deprivation.
Which provides a perfect bridge to another massive dietary fear we need to address, and that is the demonization of carbohydrates. We have been living in a low-carb, keto-obsessed culture for years now. People look at a sweet potato or bowl of rice like it's a toxic substance.
They really do.
But in our sources, physique engineer Philip Pate makes a compelling, science-backed case for carbs, specifically if you are engaged in resistance training.
Pape's approach is rooted purely in cellular biology. When you perform resistance training, when you're lifting heavy weights and demanding explosive power from your muscles are not running on dietary fat. They are running on glycogen and ATP.
Right.
ATP is adenosine triphosphate, which is the primary energy carrier in all living organisms. And the most efficient, biologically preferred way for your body to produce ATP and replenish muscular glycogen is through the consumption of carbohydrates.
He used a great analogy in his notes. He talked about clients who come to him suffering from chronic fatigue because they've been adhering to strict low-carb diets for months or even years. They feel sluggish, their lifts are stalling, they have brain fog, and they're generally miserable.
Yeah, they're depleted.
He simply introduces a pre-workout banana, just one banana, and he describes that single piece of fruit as acting like rocket fuel for these clients.
Because biologically, that is exactly what is happening. When you deprive someone who lifts weights of carbohydrates, you're essentially asking a high-performance sports car to run on fumes. Now, the body is adaptable. It can synthesize energy from fat and protein through a process called gluconeogenesis. But we need to understand what that actually means. Gluconeogenesis is an inefficient, highly stressful process.
Can you break that down for us? What does that process actually look like in the body? Because gluconeogenesis sounds like something from a medical textbook.
Sure. Think of it this way. Your body needs a specific fuel to keep the furnace burning, and that fuel is glucose. Carbohydrates are like perfectly chopped firewood, ready to be tossed right into the furnace. It burns clean and hot.
Okay, I'm with you.
Gluconeogenesis is what happens when you run out of firewood. Your body still needs to keep the furnace going, so it starts ripping the wooden siding off your house, tearing up the floorboards, and chopping up your furniture to throw into the fire.
Oh, wow. That sounds terrible.
It works. You won't freeze to death, but it takes a massive amount of energy to rip apart the house, and it leaves the structure damaged. When you eat that pre-workout banana, those carbohydrates are rapidly broken down into glucose, shuttled into the bloodstream, and delivered directly to the muscle tissue right when it needs it most.
You don't have to tear down the house.
Exactly. You don't have to tear down the house. It vastly improves endurance during the workout, and it drastically accelerates recovery afterward because the muscles are not left totally depleted.
So the theme emerging here is give the body what it actually requires to perform its duties. And that ties beautifully into an inspiring personal experiment from fitness coach Alicia Erickson. Her story is a phenomenal real-world application of this.
It's a great case study.
She got sober at age 45, completely quit processed sugars, and decided she wanted to fundamentally reshape her physical health. But instead of going the traditional route of starving herself into a massive calorie deficit, she lifted weights while eating at maintenance calories.
Which is a critical distinction. She was consuming exactly the amount of calories her body naturally required to sustain its current weight. There was no extreme deprivation.
Right. And by holding her calories at maintenance and focusing entirely on progressive overload in the gym, she completely transformed her physique. She built significant muscle, she shed body fat, and she actually stepped on stage for a bikini competition at age 50.
Incredible.
I love this story because it is a physical and emotional triumph that proves you do not have to whittle yourself away to nothing to change your body.
Her journey perfectly illustrates the biological reality of body recomposition. We have this pervasive cultural myth that you can only exist in one of two states. You are either bulking by eating a massive caloric surplus to build muscle, or you are cutting by starving yourself to lose fat.
The bulk and cut cycle.
Exactly. Erickson's story demonstrates that if you give the body adequate fuel through maintenance calories, and you apply a sufficient mechanical stimulus through the progressive overload of lifting heavier weights, the body is smart enough to multitask.
It can do both at the same time.
It will utilize that daily fuel to build metabolically expensive muscle tissue while simultaneously mobilizing your stored body fat to cover any immediate energy needs during the workouts. She didn't shrink herself to get healthy. She built herself.
But I want to play devil's advocate for a second because we have research in the stack from Dr. Sachin Panda and Dr. Laura Dugas regarding a condition called RDS, or Relative Energy Deficiency in Sport.
Ah, yes.
They conducted a clinical experiment on female mice to observe what happens when you combine exercise with severe calorie restriction. Now, I have to ask, are mouse metabolisms really a direct one-to-one comparison for human fitness models? Can we really draw that straight of a line from a rodent to a human athlete?
It is a fair question, and it's important to be skeptical of animal models. Mice are not miniature humans. However, when we look at evolutionary biology, the mechanisms that govern energy conservation and the HPA axis—
That's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, right?
Correct, which manages stress.
Yeah.
Those mechanisms are highly conserved across all mammalian species. The way a mouse's brain perceives starvation is fundamentally identical to the way a human brain perceives it. In this study, they forced the female mice to exercise while deliberately keeping them underfueled, inducing a severe calorie deficit.
And the results were bad.
The biological fallout was catastrophic, and it mirrors what we see in human athletes suffering from RDS. The mice suffered from highly fragmented sleep, their resting cortisol skyrocketed, and most alarmingly, their uteruses shrank by an astonishing 50%.
Half of a major internal reproductive organ just deteriorated.
This raises an important question. Why does our modern fitness culture normalize the disruption of our foundational hormones and the potential degradation of our internal organs just for the sake of hitting an arbitrary calorie deficit on an app?
It's madness.
What happens in those mice and what happens in underfueled humans is a protective evolutionary mechanism. The body senses a famine environment coupled with the high energy expenditure of the forced exercise. It panics.
So it just shuts things down.
It systematically shuts down any biological process that is not immediately necessary for keeping the heart beating and the lungs drawing breath. Reproduction. That is not essential during a famine, and a pregnancy would be fatal, so the reproductive organs literally atrophy.
And sleep.
Deep restorative sleep. Not safe during a famine because you need to be alert to forage or listen for predators. So sleep architecture fragments.
When you lay it out like that, it is genuinely horrifying. We are tricking our nervous systems into believing we are existing in a constant state of starvation and trauma, and then we sit around wondering why we feel anxious, why our sleep is garbage, and why our hormones are completely misfiring. We are engaging in active combat with our own biology.
Precisely. And the alternative to that combat isn't just throwing your hands up and eating whatever you want whenever you want. The alternative is intelligent fueling. Which brings us to the actual quality of the calories themselves, rather than just the quantity.
Yes, the concept of unprocessing your diet. Dr. Rupi Ojla talks about this simple but highly effective behavioral rule. Shop the outer aisles of the grocery store. That is where the single-ingredient foods live. The produce, the meats, the eggs, the dairy. You avoid the inner aisles where all the boxed, brightly packaged, hyper-engineered foods are kept.
It's a great rule of thumb.
But he backs up this behavioral trick with some incredibly compelling data from a 2019 metabolic ward study.
And we should clarify that a metabolic ward study is the absolute gold standard of nutritional research. It is very different from a standard dietary survey where people just self-report what they ate, which is notoriously inaccurate.
Right. People always lie on those. Or forget.
Exactly. In a metabolic ward, participants live in a controlled facility. Every single calorie they consume, every gram of macronutrient, and their total energy expenditure is meticulously measured by researchers. In this specific 2019 study, they provided participants with either an ultra-processed diet or a minimally processed diet. The meals in both diets were perfectly matched.
Matched how?
They had the exact same amount of calories, sugar, fat, fiber, and macronutrients presented to them. The only rule was that participants could eat as much or as little as they naturally wanted from the food provided.
And what were the results when they let human nature take the wheel?
When the participants were exposed to the ultra-processed diet, they spontaneously overconsumed an average of 500 extra calories a day compared to when they were on the minimally processed diet.
500 extra calories.
Even though the fiber and macronutrients matched on paper, the physical structure of the food completely altered their consumption habits.
500 calories a day. That is the equivalent of an entire extra meal or a massive dessert just slipping in under the radar without them even realizing they were overeating. And I think it is so important to relate this back to you, the listener. If you are sitting there struggling with overeating, if you feel like you are constantly battling cravings and losing, you need to hear this. It is not a moral failing. It is not a lack of willpower or discipline.
No, not at all.
This study proves that ultra-processed engineered foods literally hijack your brain's satiety signals. These products are scientifically designed in laboratories to bypass the stretch receptors in your stomach and to mute the hormone leptin, which is the signal that tells your brain you are full.
That is the insidious nature of food engineering. Food scientists spend billions of dollars to engineer these products for the perfect bliss point. They find the exact mathematical combination of salt, sugar, fat, and crunch that lights up the dopamine reward centers in your brain without ever triggering the physiological stop signs of fullness.
They bypass the stop signs.
The food melts in your mouth so quickly that your brain doesn't register the caloric intake. When you transition to single-ingredient foods from those outer grocery aisles, you are doing much more than just eating extra vitamins. You are fundamentally repairing your body's mechanical ability to know when it has had enough fuel. You stop having to white-knuckle your way through portion control because your biology takes over and regulates your appetite naturally.
Okay, so we've established how to fix the fuel going in and the quality of that fuel.
Yeah.
But how does the human machine actually process it once it's swallowed? This takes us right into the gut, and specifically the microbiome. Dr. Amy Shah outlines a phenomenal daily protocol for gut health that she simply calls the 30-33 rule.
A very practical framework.
It consists of 30 grams of protein at your first meal, 30 grams of fiber spread throughout your day, and 3 servings of probiotic foods.
It is a beautifully elegant framework because it addresses multiple physiological needs simultaneously. The 30 grams of protein early in the day acts as an anchor for your blood glucose. It prevents those massive insulin spikes and subsequent crashes that leave you reaching for sugar at 2 p.m.
We all know that 2 p.m. crash.
Exactly. The 30 grams of fiber acts as a prebiotic. We hear the word probiotic a lot, but prebiotics are just as vital. Fiber is literally the structural food that the beneficial bacteria in your lower intestine need to survive, multiply, and produce short-chain fatty acids, which protect the gut lining.
And the 3 servings of probiotic foods.
Things like kimchi, sauerkraut, yogurt, or kefir, those are actively seeding your digestive tract with new, diverse, live bacterial cultures.
The examples she provided from her clinical practice were wild to me. She noted that patients who strictly followed this protocol to repair their depleted microbiomes were actually able to reverse lactose and gluten intolerances. They went from being unable to digest these foods without severe distress to processing them normally.
And that completely shifts how the general public views food intolerances. We often think of them as permanent genetic life sentences. People think, I'm lactose intolerant, my body just hates dairy, end of story.
Right, they just accept it forever.
But what Dr. Shah is demonstrating is that in many cases, especially adult onset intolerances, these are actually the symptoms of a depleted, damaged microbiome. If you lack the specific enzymatic bacteria required to break down the complex proteins in dairy or wheat, of course your body will react with inflammation, bloating, and distress. You don't have the workers on the assembly line to process the materials.
That makes so much sense.
By systematically rebuilding that bacterial diversity with fiber and fermented foods like kefir, you are essentially reinstalling the biological software required to digest those foods. You are repopulating the assembly line. You are turning the gut back into an efficient, robust machine.
Reinstalling the biological software, I think that visual is so helpful. And Dr. Shah doesn't just stop at nutritional frameworks. She extends this highly structured approach to physical movement with her 4-3-2-1 exercise framework for cardiovascular longevity. Let's lay this out for the listener.
Okay.
Her ideal weekly schedule is 4 days of movement you love. So that could be walking, hiking, playing tennis, whatever keeps you active. 3 days of weight training to build that metabolic armor we discussed. 2 days of heat therapy, like a sauna, to boost heat shock proteins. And finally, 1 sprint session.
Yes, the sprint session is the capstone of the protocol.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because when I first read 1 sprint session, I thought, wait, 1 sprint? That sounds like a clickbait fitness headline. But the data supporting it is unbelievable. The sources highlight a 2-year clinical study out of Texas that focused entirely on sedentary individuals. These people incorporated just 1 sprint session a week, pushing their bodies to 85% of their maximum heart rate.
And the outcome.
The outcome was they found they successfully reversed the aging of their hearts by 20 years. 20 years of cardiovascular aging erased by sprinting once a week. You have to explain the mechanism here, because how is that physically possible?
It sounds exaggerated, but it comes down to a concept called cardiovascular elasticity. As we age, and especially if we live a sedentary lifestyle, the left ventricle of the heart, which is the main pumping chamber responsible for pushing oxygenated blood out to the body, becomes physically stiff.
Like it loses its stretch.
Exactly. The blood vessels themselves also lose their compliance. They become rigid and inflexible. This structural stiffening is what leads to high blood pressure, decreased oxygen delivery to the brain, and ultimately heart failure. When you push your body to 85% of its maximum heart rate, even just in short, intense bursts once a week, you are demanding a massive, immediate volume of blood to be pumped through the system.
So you are forcing the plumbing to handle a pressure surge.
Exactly. This extreme pressure creates what is called endothelial shear stress on the inner walls of the blood vessels. This mechanical friction forces the endothelial cells to produce nitric oxide, which is a potent vasodilator. It expands and softens the vessels.
Oh, I see.
Concurrently, it forces the physical heart muscle itself to stretch and contract with maximum force, restoring the youthful rubber band-like elasticity of that left ventricle. You literally cannot get this specific structural benefit from slow, steady-state jogging because the pressure never gets high enough. The intensity itself is the medicine.
The intensity is the medicine. That is a profound takeaway. So if you are out there incorporating these sprints and lifting these weights, how do you know if your body is actually recovering from it all? How do you measure if your nervous system is handling the stress of the workouts, plus the stress of your job and your life?
You need a metric.
Right. Our sources point to one ultimate metric. A massive study by Dr. Greg Grusicki and Kristen Holmes from WMO analyzed 21,000 members and over 2 million nights of sleep data. And they concluded that tracking your heart rate variability coefficient of variation, or HRV-CV, over a 7-day period is the undisputed gold standard for measuring your autonomic nervous system's resilience.
It's a fantastic metric.
But HRV-CV is a mouthful. Can you explain what that actually measures in plain English?
Absolutely. Most people are familiar with their resting heart rate. Say, it sits at 60 beats per minute. But a healthy heart does not beat like a perfectly timed metronome. The millisecond time gap between each beat slightly varies. That tiny variation is your heart rate variability, or HRV.
Okay, so variation is good.
Yes. A high HRV is generally a very good thing. It means your autonomic nervous system is flexible, constantly observing and adjusting to your environment, toggling smoothly back and forth between the sympathetic fight-or-flight state and the parasympathetic rest-and-digest state. Now, the coefficient of variation, the CV part of the metric, measures how much your daily HRV bounces around over a 7-day period.
So it's measuring the trend, not just a single snapshot.
Exactly. If your HRV is wildly high on a Tuesday and terribly low on a Wednesday, your CV is high. A high CV indicates your nervous system is erratic. It is struggling to maintain equilibrium and is easily knocked off balance by daily stressors. You want a low HRV-CV, meaning your nervous system is consistently stable and resilient day after day, regardless of what life throws at it.
And what I appreciate about the WOPE data is that it laid out exactly how to achieve that stability. They didn't find that the people with the best HRV-CV were taking some rare, expensive supplement. The data proved that the most statistically effective ways to lower and improve this metric were behavioral, significantly reducing alcohol intake, strictly prioritizing sleep consistency, which means going to bed and waking up at the exact same time every day, even on weekends, and regular exercise.
The boring, brilliant basics.
Always back to the basics. Why is alcohol such a destroyer of this metric?
Because alcohol, even in what we culturally consider moderate amounts, is a systemic toxin that completely suppresses autonomic function during sleep. When you drink a glass of wine before bed, your body spends the entire night frantically trying to clear the metabolic byproducts of the alcohol, like acetaldehyde, from your system.
So your body's working overtime while you sleep.
Right. Your resting heart rate stays elevated, your HRV plummets, and you miss out on deep REM sleep because the body is prioritizing detoxification over tissue repair and memory consolidation. And regarding sleep consistency, that is simply about honoring your circadian rhythm. When your brain knows exactly when it is supposed to power down and power up, your entire endocrine system harmonizes, stabilizing your HRV-CV.
Speaking of the endocrine system and how we intervene medically, we need to pivot to section 3 of our stack. Because if we are talking about longevity and health right now, we have to talk about one of the biggest medical phenomena of our current era. GLP-1 weight loss medications like Ozempic and semaglutide. They are absolutely everywhere.
They really have taken over the culture.
Now, we have to acknowledge that for people facing severe obesity or those struggling with deeply entrenched insulin resistance, these medications are genuine lifesavers. They clear glucose from the blood and they work miracles for metabolic disease. But Dr. Tina Moore has issued a highly specific warning about how these drugs are affecting the broader public.
It is a very necessary, nuanced warning. These GLP-1 agonists are incredibly effective at suppressing appetite centrally in the brain and slowing gastric emptying in the stomach. People lose weight rapidly because they simply do not want to eat. However, Dr. Moore points out a clinical reality that is often glossed over. Without concurrent resistance training and highly prioritized protein intake, up to 40% of the total weight lost on these drugs is lean muscle mass, not body fat, structural muscle.
40%. That is devastating to your metabolism if you aren't actively fighting to preserve it.
It is setting the stage for future frailty. Muscle is not just for aesthetics, it is your metabolic engine. It is your primary sink for disposing of blood glucose, and it is your armor against osteoporosis and physical decline as you age. If you lose 40% of your muscle mass, you are drastically lowering your resting metabolic rate. You are shrinking the engine.
And it makes rebounding worse, right?
Exactly. This danger is compounded by the data from the British medical journal meta-analysis included in our sources. The researchers looked at what happens when patients eventually stop taking the medication. The data showed that patients regained weight at an average of 0.4 kilograms per month, returning to their complete baseline weight in roughly 1.7 years.
But the underlying tragedy of that statistic is when they regain the weight, they are highly likely to be regaining purely fat, not the dense muscle tissue they lost. So they end up structurally and metabolically worse off than when they started the drug.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, modern pharmaceuticals are incredible, powerful tools, but they cannot bypass the fundamental biological requirements of human physiology. A drug can force your body into a massive calorie deficit, but a drug cannot synthesize muscle tissue for you. A drug cannot strengthen your bone density. A drug cannot improve the cardiovascular elasticity we talked about earlier.
You still have to do the work.
If you use these medications as a magic pill without fundamentally changing your lifestyle, without lifting heavy weights and aggressively eating protein, you are setting yourself up for a metabolic rebound when you eventually transition off them.
It is a vital reality check. But while we are on the topic of specific medical interventions, there's another area where targeted, careful therapy seems absolutely crucial, and that is midlife hormonal changes. Kathy Eason strongly recommends tracking vital signs at home, specifically monitoring blood pressure, HRV, and respiratory rate to catch silent vascular changes. And this ties directly into some fascinating research from Dr. Jason Allen at the University of Virginia regarding what exactly happens when estrogen drops in midlife.
This is a critical piece of the longevity puzzle, specifically for women. Culturally, estrogen is often thought of purely as a reproductive hormone, something related to fertility and periods, but it is actually a master regulator of vascular health. Estrogen explicitly tells the endothelial cells, which are the delicate cells lining the inside of your blood vessels, to produce nitric oxide.
Nitric oxide again.
Yes. As we discussed earlier with the sprinting protocol, nitric oxide is the miracle molecule that keeps blood vessels relaxed, elastic, and wide open. When estrogen levels plummet during perimenopause and menopause, that nitric oxide production plummets right alongside it.
Which means the blood vessels lose their compliance. They get stiff and narrow.
Exactly. And that vascular stiffness leads directly to a sharp, sudden increase in blood pressure and a significantly elevated risk of cardiovascular events in women post-menopause. This is why cafeizin advocates for meticulously tracking those at-home vitals. You might feel totally fine day to day, but your blood pressure could be silently creeping up into dangerous territory simply because of this underlying hormonal shift depriving your vessels of nitric oxide.
And this brings us to a specific biohacking protocol shared by nurse practitioner Cynthia Thurlow to combat this exact decline. She openly discusses her use of hormone replacement therapy, or HRT. Now, what exactly is she using to combat these vascular changes and protect her systemic health?
She uses a very specific, carefully calibrated stack designed to mimic the body's natural physiological environment before menopause. Her protocol includes a zero point zero 0.05 milligram estradiol patch, a pea-sized amount of 1% testosterone gel, and 200 milligrams of compounded sustained-release progesterone taken 6 nights a week.
That is highly specific. Why those exact formats?
The formats matter just as much as the hormones themselves. The estradiol patch provides a steady, continuous transdermal supply of estrogen to protect that endothelial function and nitric oxide production, while also maintaining bone mineral density and cognitive function.
Transdermal meaning through the skin, so it bypasses the liver?
Right. And the testosterone gel is vital because women need testosterone too. It is crucial for maintaining muscle mass, daytime energy, and libido. And the oral progesterone, particularly when taken at night, has a profoundly calming effect on the central nervous system. It acts on the GABA receptors in the brain, drastically improving deep sleep architecture, which is often severely disrupted by night sweats and anxiety in midlife. She isn't just treating hot flashes, she is systematically protecting her cardiovascular system, her skeleton, and her executive brain function from degradation.
It is systemic biohacking using the body's native language. Speaking of native languages and biomimicry, I want to transition to one of the wildest stories in this stack. We are moving from hormones to an incredible topical intervention. Justin Gardner explains the science behind stabilized hypochlorous acid, which is a non-toxic spray used for wound healing.
This is a really fascinating compound.
And then we have this incredible anecdote from Dr. Tina Moore to illustrate it. She was vacationing in Hawaii, and she accidentally stepped on a sharp rock in the ocean, suffering a deep puncture wound in her foot. Anyone who has been in tropical environments knows that a puncture wound in warm seawater is an absolute recipe for a horrific, stubborn staph infection.
Well, it's so dangerous.
But instead of pouring toxic chemicals, bleach, or heavy pharmaceutical antibiotics onto the open wound, she repeatedly used hypochlorous acid gel.
And the reason this works so effectively, without the collateral damage of traditional antiseptics, is rooted entirely in biomimicry. Hypochlorous acid is not some synthetic alien chemical created in a pharmaceutical lab to scorch the earth and kill everything it touches. It is the exact same antimicrobial compound that your own immune system produces when it is fighting off pathogens.
Wait, our bodies make it?
Yes. When your body detects a bacterial invader in a cut, your neutrophils, a specific type of white blood cell, rush to the site and literally manufacture hypochlorous acid to destroy the bacteria from the inside out.
So by spraying this on the wound, she wasn't introducing a foreign substance. She was basically just handing her immune system extra ammunition that it already knew exactly how to use. It completely healed the puncture wound and prevented any staph infection. And the absolute best part is that because it is a biologically recognized substance, it doesn't nuke the entire local microbiome of the skin the way harsh chemical antiseptics do. It kills the bad guys without destroying the healthy protective ecosystem of the skin surrounding the wound.
Exactly. It highlights a massive philosophical shift in how we approach healing and longevity. Instead of trying to carpet bomb the body with harsh external chemicals that cause downstream side effects, the most advanced biohacks are simply mimicking, supporting, or amplifying the body's own innate healing mechanisms. We are learning to work with the machine, not against it.
So hypochlorous acid is a great example of biomimicry, using natural compounds the body already recognizes to heal physical trauma. But our sources show this concept goes beyond just chemicals and topical gels. It also applies to energy and light.
The light therapy data is incredible.
Dr. Andrew Huberman discussed a fascinating study by Dr. Glenn Jeffrey at University College London regarding reversing the aging of our vision. The study took subjects over the age of 40 and had them look at a specific 670 nanometer wavelength of red and near-infrared light for just 2 to 3 minutes early in the morning. And the result? A 22% improvement in visual acuity. They literally reversed the aging of their retinal neurons just by looking at a specific color of light. That sounds like absolute science fiction.
It does sound like science fiction, but the mechanism is purely mitochondrial, and it makes perfect biological sense when you break it down. The cells in your retina, specifically the photoreceptors, have one of the highest energy demands of any tissue in the entire human body. They are constantly working to process visual data.
Right, processing light.
As we age, the mitochondria, which are the microscopic power plants within those cells, start to decline in function. They produce less ATP, less cellular energy. But those specific mitochondria are highly sensitive to long wavelength light, specifically that 670 nanometer red light.
So the light is physically interacting with the cells.
Yeah. Yes. Think of the cytochrome secoxidase enzyme as the final gatekeeper in the cell's energy factory. When you expose the retina to that specific red light, the light photons are absorbed by that enzyme. It acts almost exactly like a wireless charger for a smartphone battery.
A wireless charger. I love that analogy.
It stimulates the enzyme, which dramatically ramps up ATP production. You are literally recharging the depleted battery of the aging eye, which restores its functional acuity and color contrast vision.
2 to 3 minutes in the morning. That is incredibly accessible for anyone listening right now. Just a simple red light device to reverse aging in the eyes without surgery or drugs. It perfectly bridges the physical, mechanical interventions we've been talking about with the more subtle, energetic pathways of the body. Which brings us beautifully into Section 4, the mind-body connection and the nervous system.
This is where it all comes together.
We've talked about food, we've talked about light, we've talked about hormones, but what about the physical power of our thoughts? Dr. Fab Mancini shares a story about a patient named Rosie that completely redefines the power of belief. Rosie was on over 30 pills a day, she was completely bedridden, and she was actively suicidal. Her body was failing on every conceivable level.
She was in a state of absolute systemic collapse. Conventional medicine had essentially run out of tools for her.
But she didn't find some miracle experimental drug in another country. She experienced a complete physical recovery within a year solely by shifting her mindset. She adopted the absolute unwavering belief that her body inherently knew how to heal itself if she allowed it to. And this wasn't just a one-off, isolated anomaly. The sources connect this directly to Dr. Bernie Siegel's extensive, decades-long findings that a patient's belief in their own healing is a primary, statistically significant factor in surviving cancer.
This is an area where the conventional medical establishment has historically struggled because we are trained to view the body purely mechanically. We often dismiss this phenomenon as magic or just wave it away as the woo-woo placebo effect. But there is nothing magic about it. It is the science of psychoneuroimmunology. It is pure biochemistry.
Explain the biochemistry of that.
When a patient is bedridden, in agonizing pain, and truly believes they are dying, their nervous system is locked in a state of sheer terror. They're in sympathetic overdrive. They are pumping out massive, continuous amounts of cortisol and adrenaline. In that state, the immune system is actively, deliberately suppressed. The body diverts all energetic resources away from long-term cellular repair and funnels them into pure short-term survival mode.
Because you don't need to fight off a tumor if a lion is about to eat you.
Precisely.
But when Rosie shifted her belief, when she truly internalized that her body was a safe place capable of healing what biologically happened inside her,
she biochemically shifted her nervous system from a state of terror to a state of profound safety. By changing her thought pattern, she activated the parasympathetic nervous system. When the brain genuinely perceives that the body is safe, cortisol levels plummet. Systemic inflammatory markers drop. The immune system is given the green light to come back online at full capacity. Natural killer cells proliferate to hunt down disease. Endogenous opioids, which are pain-relieving chemicals produced naturally inside the body, are released into the bloodstream.
It's a cascade of healing.
Her belief didn't magically, mystically cure her. Her belief created the exact internal biochemical environment that allowed her biological machinery to finally do the heavy repair work it was designed to do all along.
it is the ultimate cascade effect. Your thoughts literally command your chemistry. And if we want to talk about how deeply these biological states run, we have to look at epigenetics and the vagus nerve. Dr. Sonia Jensen focuses heavily on manually regulating the nervous system in moments of acute stress. She advocates for physical techniques like humming, singing, shaking the body, or using cold exposure to stimulate the vagus nerve.
The vagus nerve is the superhighway of communication between the brain and the gut, and it is the master controller of that parasympathetic rest and digest state we just mentioned. Things like humming or singing create specific vocal cord vibrations that physically stimulate the vagus nerve in the neck. That stimulation sends an immediate hardwired electrical signal up to the brain that says, we are safe, you can power down the threat response.
Just shaking the body.
Shaking the body physically discharges trapped adrenaline from the muscles, much like a gazelle literally shakes its entire body after escaping a cheetah.
And the urgency of managing these acute stress states cannot be overstated, because untreated trauma doesn't just evaporate into the ether. It leaves a physical, inheritable scar on your DNA. The sources bring up Dr. Rachel Yehuda's clinical study on Holocaust survivors. This is heavy, but it is incredibly important to understand. She found that the extreme trauma these survivors endured actually epigenetically altered their descendants. The data showed that infants were being born to these survivors with severe adrenal insufficiency.
This research completely upended our traditional understanding of genetic inheritance. We used to think you only pass down your static genetic code, the fixed blueprint for hair color, eye color, and height. But epigenetics shows us that the expression of those genes, whether they are turned on or off, can be permanently altered by environment and severe experience.
It's like the hardware stays the same, but the software gets rewritten.
That's a great way to put it. The Holocaust survivors experienced such profound, prolonged starvation and terror that their bodies permanently altered the epigenetic tags on the genes regulating cortisol production. They essentially adapted their biology to survive in a world of constant, unimaginable horror. And they passed those adapted, altered tags down to their children. The children were born biologically preconditioned for a traumatic world, exhibiting abnormal cortisol levels and adrenal insufficiency from the moment of birth.
So what did this all mean for the listener? I think it means that our daily stress management, the way we handle a toxic boss or an argument with a spouse or financial panic, isn't just about making ourselves feel a little better in the moment with a glass of wine. It is literally altering our genetic legacy. Taking 5 minutes to hum, or take a cold shower, or consciously regulate your vagus nerve after a stressful meeting is an act of genetic hygiene.
Genetic hygiene, that's powerful.
You are actively preventing your daily stress from becoming hardwired into your biology and potentially passing it on.
Exactly. You are breaking the chain of stress inheritance. You are refusing to pass the physiological burden of your modern stress onto the next generation.
That is heavy, but it's also deeply empowering because it means we have control. And speaking of breaking chains, let's talk about the psychological chains we put on our own identities. Olympic snowboarder Shaun White shared a deeply personal experiment regarding this in the sources. He suffered a devastating, highly public loss at the Olympics. And in the aftermath, he started reading Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth and Byron Katie's Loving What Is. He realized that his entire identity was tied up in a massive, crushing, limiting belief, which was, I am not enough unless I am winning.
Which is a remarkably common pathology among elite athletes, CEOs, and high achievers. Their self-worth is entirely outsourced to external metrics: gold medals, bank account balances, job titles. If they lose the external metric, they lose their entire sense of self.
But I want to know how he actually fixed it. Because it's easy to read a book, but how did he apply it? By doing the internal work outlined by Tolle and Katie, he managed to actively divorce his self-worth from his achievements. He found fulfillment just in being himself, outside of the rigid construct of Shaun White, the competitor. And the paradox here is beautiful. By breaking that belief, by no longer needing the gold medal to feel worthy as a human being, he was able to compete with a much clearer, calmer head. The desperate, clutching anxiety was gone, and he went on to win another Olympic gold medal.
It perfectly illustrates the physical performance cost of anxiety. When your literal self-worth and identity are on the line during a performance, your nervous system interprets failure not just as a lost game, but as an existential threat to your survival. You tense up, you overthink your mechanics. You lose the flow state, which is that state of effortless, subconscious execution.
You get in your own way.
Right. By reframing his identity and realizing he was already enough, Shaun White removed the existential threat from the halfpipe. He didn't have to defend his ego anymore. He could just snowboard. And an unburdened, relaxed mind allows for peak physical execution.
It's letting go of the outcome to actually achieve the outcome. Which leads us right into the final section of our deep dive, Section 5, Daily Psychology, Emotional Framing, and Modern Society. We've talked about deep trauma and core beliefs, but what about the mundane, annoying, looping thoughts that plague us every single day?
The daily chatter.
Yes, the daily chatter. The sources bring in journalists Dan Harris and Michael Pollan, who use a brilliant, simple framing trick. Instead of saying, I am angry when they get triggered, they suggest shifting your internal language to anger is happening.
It is a subtle linguistic shift, but it has a profound neurological impact. When you say, I am angry, you are fusing your entire identity with a temporary volatile emotional state. You become the anger, the ego attaches to it. But when you say anger is happening, you create cognitive distance.
You step back.
You observe the emotion as a temporary physiological phenomenon passing through your body, much like observing a storm system passing overhead. It reduces the shame associated with negative emotions, and it stops the endless rumination because you aren't identifying with the storm.
Priyanka Chopra Jonas uses a similar cognitive behavioral trick that I really loved. When she catches herself spiraling into anxious thoughts, when your brain is just generating terrible scenarios at 3 a.m., she stops and asks herself one question: is this thought constructive? And she actively reminds herself that thoughts are not facts. Just because your brain generates a terrifying scenario about your career or your health does not mean it is a prophecy. It is just a misfiring alarm system.
The human brain is an incredibly powerful prediction machine, but we have to remember that it evolved with a strong negativity bias. It is constantly simulating worst-case scenarios to keep you safe from potential threats. Recognizing that those simulations are not reality, but merely survival software running in the background, is the absolute foundation of emotional resilience.
And Michael Pollan took this pursuit of mental clarity to the absolute extreme. He detailed a personal experiment where he lived completely off the grid in a cave in New Mexico for several days. While there, he practiced a concept he learned from Zen priest Roshi Joan Halifax called "don't know mind." Instead of trying to achieve some grand mystical enlightenment or solve all his life's problems, he applied this beginner's undivided attention to mundane chores, sweeping the dust off the cave floor, making a simple cup of tea.
He essentially removed the mental chatter of regretting the past and projecting into the future, and anchored his nervous system entirely in the present somatic experience of the physical world.
And he found that this undivided attention to sweeping a dirt floor was just as profound and brought him just as much peace as any seated, silent meditation. The takeaway for you listening isn't that you need to go abandon your life and find a cave in New Mexico. It's that finding profound peace just requires undivided attention to the present moment, even if that moment is just folding your laundry, washing the dishes, or driving your car.
The extraordinary is always hidden within the ordinary, provided you have the focused attention to actually see it. But maintaining that focus and maintaining that peace can be incredibly difficult, especially when we are forced to interact with people in modern society who might not have our best interests at heart.
Right, which is why spotting toxicity is such a crucial life skill for protecting your peace. Behavior expert Vanessa Van Edwards provided some fascinating insights into nonverbal cues. She talks about danger zone microexpressions that narcissists, manipulators, and liars often exhibit. Things like involuntary lip pursing, sudden physical distancing when asked a direct question, or sharply increased blink rates.
These are known in behavioral psychology as autonomic leakage signals. When someone is engaged in deception or actively masking their true intent, it requires a massive amount of cognitive load. The brain is working so hard to maintain the architecture of the lie that it fails to control subtle involuntary physiological reflexes, hence the rapid blinking or the tightening of the lips. The truth is literally leaking out of their nervous system.
The ultimate, most famous example she gives is Elizabeth Holmes, the founder of Theranos. This blew my mind. Holmes famously manufactured this artificially lowered, deep baritone voice to project authority, dominance, and competence to Silicon Valley investors. But her former employees noted that when she was intoxicated, when her prefrontal cortex was suppressed by alcohol, and she simply couldn't maintain the massive cognitive mask required to fake her voice, she would completely revert to her natural, much higher pitch. It is a perfect example of how the physical body eventually betrays the psychological facade.
What's fascinating here is, why does she feel the intense need to construct that bizarre physical facade in the first place? It points to a deep systemic societal issue regarding how we value superficial markers of success, dominance, or competence over actual, quiet authenticity.
And that desperation for superficiality is reaching terrifying extremes today. Author and athlete Rich Roll critiques an incredibly toxic internet trend happening right now called looksmaxing. Have you seen the videos of this?
Unfortunately, yes.
Young men are literally obsessing over their physical aesthetics to the point where they are taking literal hammers to their own faces, smashing their facial bones to create microfractures, hoping it will heal back into a more defined, hypermasculine, chiseled jawline.
It is deeply disturbing to watch. It represents a total, catastrophic collapse of internal validation. When an entire generation of young men feels so completely devoid of inherent worth, so hollowed out by social media algorithms that prioritize physical perfection and aesthetic dominance above all else, they turn to self-mutilation just to feel seen or valued by the digital tribe.
It is heartbreaking that this is where we are. But Rich Roll doesn't just critique the horror of it. He offers the antidote. He tells these young men to put their phones down. Stop staring in the mirror, analyzing your flaws. Pursue difficult, physical, functional goals. Build something with your hands. Lift heavy things to see what your body can do, not what it looks like. And most importantly, serve your local community. Because true, unshakable self-esteem cannot be bought, it cannot be hacked, and it certainly cannot be achieved with a hammer. It has to be earned through difficult action and genuine connection to others.
Genuine self-esteem is the byproduct of overcoming adversity and contributing value to the tribe. When you do hard things, when you serve others, you prove to your own subconscious that you are capable and valuable. That internal proof is the only true armor against the toxicity of external judgment.
Doing hard things. Choosing the hard path. That brings us perfectly to our final source, Jay Shetty. He talks about the psychological concept of status quo bias. He explains that the human brain naturally prioritizes energy efficiency above almost all else. The brain doesn't want to change because change requires burning valuable metabolic energy to forge new neural pathways. So the brain actively traps people in comfortable stagnation. This is why people stay in unfulfilling, soul-crushing jobs for decades or remain in toxic relationships long after they know they should leave.
The known misery is perceived by the primitive brain as safer than the unknown possibility, simply because the known requires less energy to process. The brain essentially says, we might be miserable, but we are surviving, so don't change anything.
Exactly. It's the ultimate energy efficiency trap. But the listener takeaway here is vital. You become your repeated patterns, not your future intentions. You can intend to write a book, you can intend to get healthy, you can intend to leave the bad job. But if your daily pattern is sitting on the couch scrolling through your phone, you simply become the person who sits on the couch. We have to actively challenge you, the listener, to practice the habits of the life you want today. You have to choose meaningful discomfort over comfortable stagnation.
Because the discomfort of growth is temporary and leads to expansion, but the discomfort of regret is permanent and leads to bitterness.
Man, what a journey we have been on today. We have covered a staggering amount of ground. From realizing that just 7 grams of amino acids can revolutionize your workout physiology, to understanding that a single, intense sprint session can shave 2 decades of aging off your heart by restoring endothelial elasticity. We've explored the dark evolutionary reality of extreme calorie deficits, shrinking internal organs, the nuanced danger of GLP-1 muscle loss, and the incredible systemic biohacking power of female hormone replacement.
We covered it all.
We really did. We learned that the belief in your own healing can literally rewrite your immune response, that humming can soothe the epigenetic scars passed down from your ancestors, and that sweeping a cave floor can bring as much peace as a mountaintop meditation. We have unmasked the micro-expressions of liars, dismantled the tragedy of looks-maxing, and challenged you to choose meaningful discomfort.
It is a massive, complex tapestry of information. But if we pull the lens back and look at the absolute core of everything we've discussed today, think about the stabilized hypochlorous acid we talked about. A simple, natural spray that perfectly mimics the body's own white blood cells to heal a deep wound without any toxic chemicals. Think about the physical act of humming, which perfectly mimics the biological signals of safety, calming the vagus nerve and shutting down the trauma response. Perhaps the ultimate key to human longevity isn't about constantly adding complex, synthetic, hyper-engineered interventions into our lives. Perhaps the most profound biohack of all is recognizing that our biology already holds the ancient perfected blueprints for absolute health. We just need to be brave enough to systematically strip away the modern interferences, from the ultra-processed diets to the toxic thoughts, from the extreme starvation to the obsession with external validation, and finally step out of the way, letting our bodies do exactly what they were brilliantly designed to do.
That is the perfect thought to leave you with today. You already have the blueprint inside you. You just have to clear the noise. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the dogma. Keep pursuing that meaningful discomfort, and we will catch you on the next one.